Now, Mr. President, to talk about what I came here to talk about the border. I live in a border state. We have 1,200 miles of border with Mexico. We have, as a country, 2,000 miles of border with Mexico. And we are seeing numbers of people showing up at the border that we have never seen before. Millions of people since President Biden was sworn in as president on January the 20th, 2021. Millions of people showing up, many of whom are claiming asylum and seeking to immigrate permanently to the United States under the asylum laws. But because the administration has a policy of releasing those individuals into the interior of the United States to await a future immigration court hearing, which may be years in the future because of backlogs, many of those individuals do not show up at their immigration court hearing, but simply are willing to play the odds that they can just melt into the great American heartland and not be returned or repatriated to their country of origin or actually have to appear at an asylum hearing. We know that statistically, the number of people who actually do show up for an asylum hearing in front of an immigration judge, only roughly 90% of them fail to meet the very stringent requirement for asylum, which is basically a credible fear of persecution based on some classification, race, sex, ethnic origin, or the like. That's a very narrow test, and it certainly does not include fear of poverty or even violence in your home country. Yet the policy of the Biden administration to basically create open borders and place individuals who show up and claim asylum. These are not people trying to run away from the Border Patrol, by the way. These are people who are turning themselves in because they know they can play the system and they will be able to make their way into the United States without any consequences, certainly no legal consequences. I'm sure those of my colleagues who visited the border, and we had a bipartisan group just a couple of weeks ago who did visit again in both Yuma, Arizona, and El Paso. But as my colleagues can attest, there is no data, there is no image, there frankly are no words to adequately convey the complexity of what's happening at the border today. To understand, you have to see and hear for yourself. Several years ago, I traveled to Brooks County, which is a little county in South Texas, where I visited a ranch that the Border Patrol had a rescue beacon in the middle of. And just to explain, the Border Patrol does a lot of humanitarian rescues because you can imagine people coming from Central America up across the land bridge to Mexico up to the United States. Many of them show up dehydrated, suffering from exposure. Some of them, frankly, die on the trip. But the Border Patrol, while they have the responsibility of enforcing our immigration laws at the border and interdicting illegal drugs, they also rescue migrants who are in distress. And what these rescue beacons are out in the middle of nowhere, frankly, what they are large poles with a light on top that allows migrants who are sick, injured, or otherwise in distress to contact law enforcement for help and immediately get access to first aid, water, food, whatever they need. There's a sign at the bottom of these rescue beacons that instructs the migrants to press a red button for help and to remain in the area. Well, when I first went to Brooks County, which is where just Falfurrias is probably the largest inland port where the Border Patrol has a checkpoint in Brooks County, I was surprised to see the rescue beacons not written in just English, not just written in Spanish, but in Mandarin. Mandarin. This is Brooks County, Texas, a rural county 70 or so miles from the U.S.-Mexico border, and the rescue beacon is in Chinese, the Chinese language. This is a factoid about the border crisis that doesn't get nearly the attention that it deserves. What this tells me, and what I've learned subsequently, is that migrants just aren't coming from Mexico. They're not just coming from Central America. They are literally coming from all around the world. Now, when I hear, for example, Vice President Harris or the President of the United States or Secretary of State Blinken talk about the migration crisis, they want to talk about root causes. And I think, although that's a little bit vague, I think what they're talking about is they view migration as an economic crisis. People living in their home countries seeking a better life, which we all certainly understand, or fleeing violence. They want to talk about root causes. But I think what they don't understand, or certainly aren't articulating, is the fact that this is far broader than a regional problem concentrated in Mexico and Central America. And I think the fact that these rescue beacons have been for many years written in English, Spanish, and Mandarin is evidence of the fact that this is a far larger problem, but one that the administration has simply not acknowledged. A couple of weeks ago, I traveled with a bipartisan delegation of colleagues to El Paso, Texas, which is the westernmost point in my state. Actually, just a bit of trivia, Mr. President. The city of El Paso is closer to the Pacific Ocean than it is to the eastern tip of Texas. Give you an idea of the scope of what we're talking about. It's a big place. But we traveled to El Paso, Texas, but we also, which is an urban area, but we also went to Yuma, Arizona, which, if you look on the map, is a southwestern portion of Arizona, another border state, just right up against California. But it's an agricultural community. I think it's fair to say, I'm not disparaging it, it's kind of a sleepy little agricultural town. We met a number of people in El Paso and Yuma that I want to mention. In El Paso, we went out on a night patrol with the Border Patrol. They got on their horses and they rode over this large area where there was a lot of traffic. And then we were informed that they had detained 2 migrants. And so we walked over there to sort of see what was going on. And the Border Patrol said, well, these 2 are from China. El Paso, Texas, 2 Chinese migrants trying to make their way across the border. Matter of fact, one of the Border Patrol agents had to use an app on a phone, I think it's called Google Translate, in order to communicate with these migrants. And then when we went to one of the detention facilities, or processing facilities actually, not really detention, we met a family from Uzbekistan while touring the Border Patrol Central Processing Center in El Paso. Not Mexico, not Central America, but Uzbekistan. You can look that up on the map. It's not part of the region that the President and the Secretary of State and the Vice President are talking about when they're talking about root causes of illegal immigration. But when we went to Yuma, the little sleepy agricultural town on the border of Mexico and the United States, the acting Border Patrol chief told us that one of the unusual features of the number of the migrants that came across Yuma were they came from 176 different countries, and they spoke more than 200 languages. And you might ask, how in the world is that possible? Well, Senator Kelly, one of the Arizona senators, said, well, there's an airport right across the border in Mexico, northern border, in a city called Mexicali. And again, if you look at your map of Mexico, you'll see Mexicali is a pretty large urban area right there on the Arizona border. And that people fly into there. Of course, they have to pay human smugglers, criminal organizations that are a network of that smuggle human beings for money from anywhere in the world to that airport, and then they walk across or walk up to the Yuma Border Patrol and claim asylum. And they noted that many of them are apparently well-to-do. Somebody mentioned, Gucci luggage. I don't know whether Gucci makes luggage or not, but you get the idea. These are not the sort of mental picture that I think many people have of migrants who are seeking a better life necessarily, fleeing poverty, I should say, or fleeing violence. So the reason I mention this is because the reality of what's happening on the ground along the border undercuts the rhetoric we hear from the administration about how to solve this problem. The White House has pushed a narrative that the only way to fix the border crisis is to fix the, quote, root causes of migration, meaning the economic and security concerns that cause people to come here. It has honed in on the Northern Triangle, including El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, as the primary region of concern. The administration's border czar, Vice President Harris, even led the development of the, quote, root causes strategy. The problem is the data shows that this is not the region driving illegal migration. Last month, Customs and Border Protection encountered more than 250,000 migrants at the southern border. Fewer than 33,000 of those 250,000 were from Northern Triangle countries. 33,000 out of the 250,000 were from Northern Triangle countries. So these are the three countries that the administration is focused on. And it reminds me of the story of, people who look through a soda straw at a problem. Well, they can look down the soda straw and they can see what's happening there, but they don't see what's happening around it. And they lose any sense of context or of the complete picture. And that's what the administration is doing when they're looking at the border and the humanitarian and national security crisis occurring there on a daily basis in my state's backyard. Matter of fact, these three countries represent only about 13% of the migrants encountered at the southern border in December. Mexican nationals, the large country right on our southern border. Mexico's not driving the numbers either. Only 19% of the border encounters in December were Mexican nationals. So where are all these men and women and children coming from? Well, you can take a global map, a map of the world, and you can take a dart and throw the dart at the map, and you're likely to hit a place where these migrants are coming from. Last year, across the entire border, Customs and Border Protection encountered migrants from 174 different countries. People from every corner of the globe are traveling through Mexico and crossing America's southern border. There is no question that the conditions in Mexico and Northern Triangle are contributing, but they're only a small fraction of the problem. People around the world see the Biden administration catching and releasing migrants by the thousands on a daily basis. They see the years-long wait for asylum cases to be adjudicated. They see the lack of any interior enforcement by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And as they look at all this picture, they realize that if they can make it across the southern border, they're likely to be able to stay in the United States for years, if not a lifetime. Despite what the administration may think, this is not just a regional problem. It is a global phenomenon run by transnational criminal organizations. That ought to concern all of us. Last year, CBP encountered migrants from 174 different countries. If the administration wants to fix the root causes of this crisis, are they going to fix the world? You can see why their misconception, their misunderstanding, their erroneous narrative of what the problem is doesn't help solve the problem. So it's time, Mr. President, for the Biden administration to acknowledge the reality of the situation and look at solutions that are realistic and effective. In order to get this crisis under control, we have to move quickly on a bipartisan basis to insist on the enforcement of our immigration laws when people attempt to enter our country other than through legal means. That is the only viable path forward. And the sooner that the administration understands that, the better off we will all be. Mr. President, I yield the floor.